Yes.
Everyone please rise. We'll be led in prayer by Alderman Bill Nash.
Almighty God, we ask for your blessing upon the members of this council as we assemble here in this chamber to conduct the ongoing business of our city. With your guidance, we will strive to ensure that all our decisions are for the common good, and your inspiration will instill respect, compassion, thoughtfulness in all of our deliberations. Give us the strength and wisdom to lead by example as the people's representatives, and that peace and harmony will mark all our proceedings and keep us faithful to the trust placed in us by the citizens of our community. Amen.
Amen. Alderman Gould, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would ask for an adoption of the minutes of January 6th and 21st, 2020. Is there such a motion, please? Alderwoman Ella Miles, second Alderwoman Gould. Is there discussion? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor? It's unanimous. The vote is 7-0.
Petition and communication. Audit report presented by Ron Nozick from Blum Shapiro.
Entertain a motion, please, to accept. Please.
I think he's doing a presentation.
He's going to go up too? Oh, okay.
But yes, we need to accept it after this.
Yeah, okay. Come on.
And then afterward, we need to accept it.
After the.
Okay. Could be very brief. Okay. Hello, Ron Nozick from Blum Shapiro. I'm the engagement partner for the audit for the city of Norwich. And we're just going to go over some financial highlights relative to the audit for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2019. You're going to hear some redundancy based on just numbers and percentages off of what Matt has already shared with you earlier in the last half hour, because a lot of the financial indicators we're also typically conveying to you in delivering the financial statements to you and making some meaningful analysis of them. So what we'll talk about tonight real quick is we'll go over the financial results, the reporting results, some financial highlights, and then some required communications that we are required as your auditors to provide you, those charged with governance. From the perspective, you sure it's that one that kicks it forward? Okay. That's backwards. All right, we got it now. Okay, sorry about that. So the audit is performed actually under three sets of standards, if you will. It's performed primarily under generally accepted auditing standards. It's performed under generally accepted governmental auditing standards, which is commonly referred to as the Yellow Book. And then also it's performed under uniform guidance, which was formerly the Federal Single Audit Act, and under the Connecticut State Single Audit Act. Basically, to break that down, under generally accepted auditing standards, that's the primary scope under which we audit and report, and that is the primary opinion, page 1 of the audited, the bound financial statements that you received upon issuance. Under Yellow Book, we're on top of the audit, which really is focused on the financial information. We're also required to gain an understanding, document that understanding, and test internal controls related to financial reporting through the finance function of the city. And we report to you if we are any findings that would reach the level of a material weakness or significant deficiency in your internal control. And we also are required to test compliance matters that a violation of such would, in our minds, be material to the financial statements. We report to you on that as well. And finally, under Uniform Guidance and Connecticut State Single Audit Act, they're two separate acts, but they mirror one another quite closely. And it's very similar to Yellow Book, only the focus isn't on the overall entity. It's solely on the major programs that have been selected for testing based on the criteria that the federal government or the state of Connecticut provides us in making those selections. So from a reporting results perspective, which in my personal opinion is really the most important thing here, what was our conclusions based on the work we performed. Under generally accepted auditing standards, we're issuing an unmodified or clean audit opinion on the financial statements, which basically says, in our opinion, they fairly represent the financial position and results of operations of the city for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2019. Under Yellow Book, again, we would be required to report to you any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies that we uncovered during the performance of our work over your internal control systems. There were no such weaknesses that were detected. And under compliance, as I said, we're required to identify the compliance requirements that could be material and then test in order to assure that compliance is in fact in place, and there were no instances of non-compliance that were identified during the performance of our procedures. Finally, again, and very similar, under your federal single audit major programs and state single audit major programs, there were no material weaknesses that were identified and under compliance, and we're actually issuing an opinion under both of these acts relative to compliance. We've issued an unmodified opinion, meaning that there were no violations of compliance relative to the federal or state programs that we tested. This here, and I know you need the Hubble telescope to see it from where we're all sitting, but I can stand a little closer and just give you what I'm trying to present here. Is on the left are the federal programs that actually were selected for testing. On the right are the state programs that were actually selected for testing, again, under the criteria that is provided by federal and state agencies. So in the end, under federal programs tested, we ended up testing $11.6 million. Your total federal grant expenditures for the year were 18.9. So in the end, we ended up testing 61% of the program expenditures that were transpired. Under the state of Connecticut, listing all of the programs that were tested, they total up to about $6.9 million in state program expenditures. Total state program expenditures subject to the Connecticut State Single Audit Act were a little over 13.1 million, almost 13.2 million. So we got about 53% coverage there. The reason I say programs that are subject to the Connecticut Single Audit, there are some programs, actually quite a few, that are not, like ECS and formula grant programs where there are no compliance requirements. They're basically going off of data, be it expenditure data from prior years or whatever the case may be. So they exclude those from the body of selection. From the perspective of financial highlights, and I'll go over these relatively quickly, it's kind of hard to get summary results in front of you that are meaningful when you guys see that report. It's 140 some odd pages of information, but I'm going to try to boil it down to what I think is significant, and as I said, some of this will mirror what Matt was saying earlier. But these right here, this is just an analysis of your governmental funds, and it really is in summary format. Up top, that top section is the fund balance position as of June 30, 2019, And then the second section is the summary of changes in that fund balance. So what took us to beginning fund balance to ending fund balance. The focus here for me is simply going to be the general fund, at least for this evening. So if you look at the general fund fund balance as of June 30, it's $13.7 million. That is I think Matt referred to about an 11% percentage. That's total fund balance. And you see there's two pieces to fund balance in the general fund. $69,000 is assigned fund balance, and then the 13.6, almost 13.7 million is unassigned fund balance. That's again the percentage that Matt referred to. That's a little over 10%, I believe. The assigned portion is assigned solely for encumbrances. All of that assignment is relative to encumbrances that were in place as of June 30. From a revenue and expenditure perspective, I'm working from third up from the bottom. In the general fund column there, you see that you had a depletion of fund balance during the fiscal year of $1.8 million, 1.842. Based on the discussions earlier, you're all well aware of that and the reasons behind that, and that being that you're basically planning for a deficit because you're utilizing a portion of fund balance in order to balance the budget when you're appropriating it due to the cost relative to education. This is probably even worse to see, but this basically is a summary of your budgetary activity, top being revenues and other financing sources, the bottom being expenditures and other financing uses in your revenue classifications and expenditure functions. And the purpose of this is just to give you an indication within those categories as to how you did relative to, from the revenue perspective, did you collect what you had projected you were going to be collecting for revenues? And from the expenditure side, were you able to manage under the budgetary constraints that were adopted at the beginning of the year and modified during the fiscal year? So you see all the way over to the right, you got a variance column. So that's basically from the revenue perspective is are you above or below what your projection was? Just looking at that total line, total revenues and other financing sources, you had a $678,000 deficit, if you will, on the revenue side. So you collected $678,000 less than what you had anticipated collecting. And then from the expenditure side, same thing. You actually managed quite close to all of those revenue function or expenditure functions, and ended up with a $47,000 surplus. So if you ever hear the term, budgetary deficit or budgetary surplus, basically it's the addition of those two numbers together. So the mean value of the 678 and the 47. So you did have a deficit overall relative to budgetary activity, but just due to how GAAP measures compared to the way budget measures, not nearly as significant as the $1.8 million that we talked about under the GAAP statement that I was referring to just a second ago. This is pretty much commentary that I won't read to you here this evening, but the one thing I would highlight on again is we're talking about the $13.7 million in fund balance, which represents the unassigned fund balance, which represents 10.8% of total general fund. And I'm using actual expenditures. Matt used revenues. You really can, and the rating agencies actually will use both unless you tell them one is more predictable than the other. It would appear that somewhere along the line, probably in conversations with finance, that your financial advisor has determined that the revenue side is maybe the more predictable. In the audited financial statements, the very first section in there is management's discussion and analysis, and management makes this reference. So I kept true to that. And then just giving you some commentary as to where the decreases were or increases were. One thing here, and this would be something Matt didn't mention, but the rating agencies certainly look at, is your collection rate on your current levy, and how that plays out year to year. And it was 97.3. I'm looking at the second dash there. 97.3% of the property taxes that were levied were collected for the current list year, and it's been 97 point something for the last, I think, 4 or 5 years. So the fact that it remains consistent is an indication to the rating agencies that your tax base is at least willing to participate at a level that they have been, consistently. So, business type activities. The one thing here I would just, highlight, and this is basically the change in net position for the fiscal year. You see the Norwich Public Utilities, they took quite a jump, almost 14.5 million. That has primarily to do with construction and assets that came online at the utility during the fiscal year, as well as some capital contributions that were received by them. Because if you look at your operating income as well, that had a pretty big surplus, operating income of $19.1 million, but that isn't relatively that inconsistent with some of the stuff that you see historically going on. Here again, I won't take your time this evening, but just giving you some highlights as to what changed in those 3 columns that we're looking at there. Department of Public Utilities, which is a major fund, then your other non-major enterprise funds all roll up together. That's the golf course and a couple other funds that are in there. I escape my memory at the moment. And then your internal service fund. The one thing I would give some consideration to, and it's not that significant of a number, but as I said here, that the internal service fund is now in a deficit fund balance position or net asset position, as it's referred to for a business type activity, due to some insurance claims that probably were above estimates. Typically, if you're using a third-party administrator, they're giving you what the contribution rates are going to be for those 2 funds. I think it's comprised of health insurance and workers' comp, and workers' comp took the biggest hit during the fiscal year last year. But again, that is in a deficit position as of June 30. That doesn't mean it's still in it today, but as of June 30 it was. This is long-term debt schedule, just taking you from beginning balance to ending balance for the fiscal year. The big thing here, really the only thing you've gotten was discussed in great length earlier, your general obligation bonds, and most of the statistics relative to debt burden and things like that, that's the number, the 48.665, and then add the premiums to that, so total of $51 million at year end. That's the number that is being used to generate the statistics that Matt was referring to earlier. It does not; those do not include the pension liability and the OPEB liability. You see, they're down below, away from bonded debt. But again, you do see for purposes of order of magnitude, those are the big liabilities that are sitting there above and beyond the bonds. For your governmental activities, your pension is about almost $75 million as of June 30, and the OPEB is 33. The 100 that Matt was referring to, I'll jump next slide. It's going to be the business type activity. So a piece of that pension is allocated to the business type activities, as well as the OPEB gets allocated over there as well. So those are, like as Matt said, a little over 100 for the pension liability and about 40 million for the OPEB liability. These final slides, and I know you can't see them very well, but there is a handout there with all of this information. This is an analysis, these next 2 slides. This is your pension liability, both for the city plan, the fire plan, and then the OPEB liability. And it's giving you 7 years here, or 6 years here relative to pension, and I think about 4 years over the OPEB liability, simply because that information wasn't necessary to be accumulated up until last year. So there was a look back. But nonetheless, it gives you a pretty good eye as to where that liability is moving and where more importantly, the contribution requirements are moving on an annual basis. There are some other disclosures in the notes to the financial statements that I think are valuable to look at, and that disclosure, it's in your RSI actually, indicates what the actuarial recommended contribution was and what the city actually contributed to the plans, so you can get a feel for where those stand. But as Matt said, right now, that OPEB liability as of June 30, 19 is 35.4% funded. The city plan here, the pension liability, that's the last number I'm looking at, is 63.07% funded, and the fire plan about almost 47% funded. So as Matt said, the rating agencies are going to nick you on that until you're somewhere upwards of 80% funded. So there's a gap there. You're not alone in that by any stretch of the imagination. But so that's going to end the financial highlight and really just wrap up here. These are the required communications that under auditing standards we're required to present to you. They actually come in a letter to the council when we issue the financial statements. There's just 2 slides here that categorically list these areas that we're supposed to disclose to you. My only thing I'm going to tell you tonight is the reason that we're supposed to do this, or that we have to do this, and the emphasis behind it is that if in our minds management is exhibiting some bias relative to the financial statements, meaning they want them to look something other than perhaps they actually are, that's what all these categories are basically covering. So if we thought that was transpiring, we're required to communicate it to you. You do with it as you see fit, as the head of governance, if you will, in the city. But in all cases, there were no matters that came to our attention relative to these topical categories that we were compelled to communicate to you. So that is about all I was going to chat about tonight. I'm more than happy to take any questions from you relative to what's in this or what was in the financial statements. If you had a chance to look at them, I think we issued them first week of December, so they have been out for a while, but I also know it's a pretty burdensome document, so you may still be working through or may not have had a chance to.
Any questions? Anything else to share?
I'm sorry?
Anything else to share?
Just that the financials, this requires all, as well as maps will be on our website.
Yep.
This week.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Back to our request for a motion to now accept the report as given. Alderman Wilson, second by Alderwoman Gould. Is there discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? It's unanimous. Vote is 7-0.
Number 2, annual report from the Commission for Persons with Disabilities.
Motion, please. Bring this forward. Alderwoman Wilson, second by Alderwoman Miles. Is there discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous. Vote is 7-0.
City Manager's report.
Thank you. This is the city manager's report for February 3rd, 2020. I attended the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities on Property Tax Reform and the Connecticut Interlocal Risk Management Agency's annual meeting, where I attended a seminar on cyber threats. I attended the Census 2020 press conference held by Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysowitz, along with council members and other local dignitaries. I also attended the monthly Harbor Management Commission meeting. Controller Josh Pothier and I continued to meet with department heads and with the superintendent of Norwich Public Schools on the 2020-21 budget process. My assistant Jackie Barbarossa and I met with Gene Carantz Norwich Public Utilities Program Coordinator, who is also the City of Norwich's Sustainable Connecticut contact to discuss future projects that could enable the city to gain silver certification in the program in the future. City Assessor Donna Ralston has filed the October 1st, 2019 grand list of all taxable and tax-exempt properties in the city with the city clerk's office. The overall net taxable grand list for real estate, personal property, and motor vehicles was filed at $2,021,168,261, which represents an overall increase of $29,904,627 over last year's grand list, or about 1.5% increase. The city's lockbox tax payments as of January 31st were 1,280 payments totaling $1.7 million. Payments at Norwich People's Bank branches were 464 payments totaling $737,000. Final numbers will be in my next report, since taxpayers had until February 3rd, 2020 to pay the January installment. The Southeast Area Transit District will honor Rosa Parks on her birthday on February 4th with Transit Equity Day activities. Seton will have small memorials on several buses and a fare-free day on all routes. Seton wants to thank their current riders and encourage new riders to try transit for a day at no cost. Norwich Youth and Family Services is sponsoring Norwich Hope and Compassion, a support group for people whose lives have been impacted by substance use disorder. The free event will be held on the first and third Wednesdays of the month, starting February 5th at St. Vincent de Paul Place, 120 Cliff Street, from 12:30 p.m. to 2 p.m. to deal with the opioid crisis. For more information, contact Ray Allen Bergman, Drug-Free Community Coordinator at Norwich Youth and Family Services. And that concludes my report for this evening.
Thank you. Other questions, City Manager? Yes, Alderman DeLucia.
So our net taxable grand list went over $2 billion. Is that the first time that we've been over $2 billion in net grand list?
I think we might have been over $2 billion earlier in this decade, before the adjustment in the grand list, probably in 2010 or whatever. I'm looking to Tony to confirm that, but I think that's.
Yeah, that may have been the case.
So we bounced back to pre-Great Recession levels.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Alderman Nash.
City Manager, just wondering how the fire chief's meetings are going.
The last one I didn't have because of having the flu, but we've scheduled one for the next few weeks.
Thank you, sir.
Any further questions? Hearing none, thank you.
You're welcome.
Citizen comment on resolutions.
I declare that open, and our first person signed up is Mr. Stan Lucas.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As a lifelong resident of Norwich, and thinking about my dad tonight and the fact that he sat on the council for a number of terms and was president of the city council, I would like to talk about resolution number 10. I'd like to see favorable action on appointing an ad hoc committee to work with the Recreation Department to consider the resurfacing of our clay courts that are in total disuse up on Wreck Hill. In past years, by past, I mean 50s, 60s, and 70s, the courts were used and were in perfect shape. But there has come a time where we can't maintain the courts in the kind of condition that we would want clay courts to be. Therefore, we would like to consider new, modern, all-weather type of surfaces for those courts, and we've had some organizational meetings, and we would ask that you move to form that type of ad hoc committee and unleash some avid tennis players as volunteers to try to put the kind of work and effort that would be needed to come up with some good probable solutions to the situation with the courts, and hopefully ultimately bring them back on for the youth, middle-aged people, and people of my age to use. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fred Phelps?
Good evening. I'm Fred Phelps. I've been a Norwich resident for 30 years. I come before you tonight to ask you to speak in favor.
Excuse me, Fred, can we have your address, please?
Yes,
for the
it's
record?
17 Sabrina's Court.
Thank you.
Okay. Come before you to ask you to speak in favor and to ask you that you support the Recreation Department's effort to establish a committee and contribution fund for the restoration of the tennis courts, specifically the Armstrong courts in Norwich. Tennis is a great sport. I've met some exceptional people, made some lifelong friendships through this sport of tennis, many of them here in Norwich. The present state of tennis in Norwich is seriously at an all-time low. The Armstrong courts are in total disrepair and unusable. Norwich has 4 other courts for public use. The 2 at Stanton School are in abysmal condition. In contrast, Colchester, which has half the population of Norwich, has 7 courts for public use. The Rec Department held an informal meeting in January to determine interest in restoring the Armstrong courts, and more than 20 people attended that meeting, a meeting which had limited public advertising, thus showing that there is distinct interest in the sport locally. Additionally, it is my understanding there have already been some entities that have expressed interest in donating funds to support the effort to restore the Armstrong courts, further indicating the significance of this endeavor. In 2014, the idea of restoring the courts was brought before the City Council. The cost was roughly going to be $280,000 for 6 courts. In the 6 years since, the cost has more than doubled, as it is estimated that it will now cost $400,000 for 4 courts. It's only reasonable to expect those costs are going to continue to rise over time. That fact alone makes it imperative to implement a plan now to restore the Armstrong courts so they can be used by the public. It is clear the city has some responsibility in this regard. I strongly urge you to support this plan, and that you also consider budget funding in the future for this issue should the private contributions fall short of their intended goal. As I said earlier, tennis is a great sport. It has all kinds of potential here in Norwich, from children's clinics and camps to adult leagues and tournaments, and for just simple recreation and exercise. It's a true quality of life issue for many people of the city, and it's my sincere hope that you will vote in favor of the resolution to resurrect tennis here in Norwich. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? Yes, sir, please.
Rodney Boyd, 62 Roosevelt Avenue. I had occasion to stop up at the tennis courts this afternoon, and from the looks of it, they haven't been taken care of in the past 30 years. In the past 50 years, I don't recall anybody ever playing on those tennis courts. Now, I Googled care and maintenance of tennis courts this afternoon to see what people were actually supposed to be doing as far as maintaining these clay courts. They are a clay court, and it's fairly extensive. Before we go spending $200,000 or $300,000 on these courts, I'd like to see if there's a whole bunch of interest from the community in doing tennis. Most people I see out here today, they're lucky if they can get off the couch. So I'm not averse to having the clay courts even if you've got to spend a good deal of sums for it. It depends on what the community wants. But I've not seen a hell of a lot of interest in people playing tennis in the last bunch of years. I was never much good at it myself, but that's beside the point. Whichever you decide to do is fine.
Thank you, sir. Else like to speak? Yes, please.
Good evening, Sheila Hayes, 382 Laurel Hill Avenue. Mr. Bowie, I beg to differ with you. There are many youth in this city who would benefit from playing tennis. Youth from every neighborhood, youth in every walk of life. My son and his friends, my niece and her friends all play tennis. Their children play tennis. It is a sport. It gets kids out of the house. It gets them away from the electronic devices. It is not that expensive. You just need a racket, tennis balls, and a person to play, or you can even play against the wall if you want to. So I'll ask for the support. I will be disappointed, Mr. Lucas, though, that those courts would not be clay, but I understand in this day and age the amount of just physical work that it takes and the volunteers to maintain clay courts. But I do support the formation of the tennis courts, and I'd like to see the Armstrong tennis courts come back online. Thank you.
Thank you. Any else? Yes, please.
Deanna Rhodes, Director of Planning and Neighborhood Services for the City of Norwich. I just wanted to talk to you really quickly about item number 6 on the agenda, which is the sale of the property at 87 Fifth Street. I just wanted to bring it to your attention that it is on the National Register. It's part of the Greenville Historic District, and just take a couple minutes just to read what qualifies it to be on there and what was the original inventory. So 87 Fifth Street is located close to the north side of the road. It's built in 1850. It's built about the same time as number 82. They're similar in style, and they're the first two residents on the street. So the description says 87 Fifth Street is a small cottage with a clapboard wood frame which rests on a brick foundation. The main side hall entrance is located on the 3-bay facade. A secondary entrance has been added to the west elevation. Most of the windows retain their original 6/6 sash. An early shed-roofed addition extends from the rear of the house. Another small house, historically related to this one, stands at the rear of the property. It is a one-story ridge-to-street building constructed about 1870 and is listed in the directory as 87.5 Fifth Street. The significance of it is the architecturally significant as a well-preserved example of a simple worker's cottage of the 19th century. This house is also significant for its historical associations with the Henderson family. Robert Henderson, a local millwright, probably built this house around 1850. In 1862, he lived here with his sons, John and Jean Henderson, both machinists. By 1871, Robert had moved into the rear house, and John and James had relocated within Greenville. It was about this time that Robert built the house to the rear, 85 Fifth Street, which he rented out. Robert's widow, Margaret, retained the two small cottages after his death. James Ward was the owner of 87 and 87.5 in 1914, and Mary Ward, his widowed mother, lived in the rear cottage. I just wanted you to be aware of that, so when we're selling it, it's on the record so that the person will understand that the building that they're purchasing is historic. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone like to join us on any other resolutions, please, under citizen comment? Anyone else under citizen comment? And third and final time, anyone else under citizen comment on resolutions listed? Seeing none, I declare the hearing closed. Thank you.
New business resolution 1, relative to appointing a certified public accounting firm to perform regular and general audits for fiscal year 2019-2020.
Motion, please, to bring this forward. Alderwoman Miles, second Alderman Nash. Is there discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion passes. The vote is 7-0.
Number 2, relative to reappointments, appointments of regular members, and appointments of alternate members to the Ethics Commission.
Motion, please, to bring this forward. Alderwoman Gould, second by Alderwoman Miles. Is there discussion? Alderwoman Gould.
I'd just like to take a minute to thank Bob Ballard and Robin Lawson for their willingness to continue to serve on the Ethics Commission, to thank Karen Lucas and Scott Camisar for their willingness to be reappointed as regular members to the commission, and to thank Bob Jasinski and Lori Plouffe for their willingness to serve as alternates on this very important commission for the city of Norwich.
Thank you. Is there further discussion or comment? Seeing none, all those in favor? It's unanimous. The vote is 7-0.
Number 3, relative to a reappointment of a regular member to the Connecticut Municipal Electric Energy Cooperative, CMAC, as a ratepayer representative.
Motion, please. Alderwoman Gould, second Pro Tem Bettencourt. Is there discussion? Yes, Alderwoman Gould.
Again, I would like to thank Mr. Eggleston for his willingness to be reappointed as the ratepayer representative to CMAC. We'll be hearing from him in 2 weeks at an informational. This is a tremendous responsibility, and I appreciate his efforts on behalf of the city of Norwich.
Thank you. Is there further comment? Seeing none, all those in favor? It's unanimous. The vote is 7-0.
Number 4, relative to a reappointment to the Public Parking Commission.
Motion, please. Bring it forward. Alderman Nash, second Alderwoman Gould. Is there discussion? For the record, the person being reappointed as a regular member is Mr. Jeffrey Lord. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor? It's unanimous. Vote 7-0.
5, relative to a reappointment of an alternate member to the Inland Wetlands Watercourses and Conservation Commission. It's the CCP representative.
Motion, please. Bring it forward. Pro Tem Bettencourt, second Alderwoman Miles. Is there discussion? Seeing none, the person being appointed is Swaranjit Singh. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Vote is 7-0.
Number 6, relative to the sale of 87th Street.
A motion to bring this forward, please. Alderwoman Miles, second Alderwoman Wilson. And I would ask for a motion to amend this resolution since there are blank spaces. And I have numbers that I can recommend with your acceptance. Alderwoman Miles and second Alderwoman Gould. And in the third paragraph, after the dollar sign at $15,000. And the fourth paragraph, fourth line, the price of it's saying $15,000, and that is Sonia Cambridge Abule, that is Aubele, of East Lyme, Connecticut. Following blank. And in the final blank on 6th line down, again, it would be to Sonia Cambridge Abule of East Lyme, Connecticut. The motion to amend is before us. Is there discussion? Seeing none, all is in favor of the amendment? It is unanimous on the resolution as amended. Is there further discussion? Alderman DeLucia.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to have Deanna Rhodes come to the podium. I have a quick question for her.
Certainly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um,
So we all heard your comments, but it piqued a question in my mind as we prepare to transfer this property over. Is this new owner aware of this historical significance that you cited? And also, are there going to be covenants or other restrictions based on what you said that this buyer is aware of or not aware of?
Well, I'm not sure if they're aware of it. That's why I wanted to bring it up. So when we do originally look at properties to sell, we look at that. I look if it's on the register, and it is a contributing building in the Greenville National Historic District. Brought that up when we had our discussion about sale, and it did go for sale, and there's an offer on it, which is always great news. There's two houses, obviously, like I said, on this property, but when I hear a $15,000 price, I'm hopeful that's a great price, that someone's going to repair and rehab those two houses and not buy it for demolition, and that's my concern, a very inexpensive lot, because the city would be remiss to sell a property that we own without, that's on the National Register as a contributing building, without telling them that we should be taking advantage of historic tax credits or, doing what they can do to rehab the house, because we are selling it. But there is no other restrictions on it. When you go, but however, if you want to do demolition of a structure that's on the National Register, what happens is there's a 6-month waiting period that the city has, a demolition delay, and after the 60 days during that time, if the State Preservation Office hears about it and they're interested in it, and they usually are, because we have to alert the different historical organizations. What happens is there's an additional 90-day delay that the state gets involved after a demolition permit is issued. So it's a while, and during that period, they try to negotiate and try to help see if the owner can take advantage of credits or do something else or whatever. So I'm not asking necessarily for the city to put any kind of specific deed restrictions on it, but I think it's, it's important that the person who's purchasing this knows that the city, I don't believe we're selling it for demolition, and I don't think that should be the case, because it's on the register and it's contributing, and the reputation with the state, for the SHPO office is really important to us, because we obviously work with them closely when we're going for grants, such as Uncas Leap and things like that. We don't want to have a reputation where it appears that, we're selling properties and not telling people they're on the register, and that they should be attentive to that. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Okay.
Alderman Nash.
Okay, so do they know about the historical, or the people buying, do they know or do
I don't know if they know. So I asked that question today. I don't know if they know. And I talked to Jackie Barbarossa, and she wasn't sure if they know that through the realtor or not. But when we, go to list these things, we do say, hey, this is, we try to pass that information along, because that's the same thing. If we knew a property is in the floodway or something else, we'd say, hey, you need to know this. So I don't know if the owner knows. I was hoping that the person would be here this evening and could hear it.
Thank you.
Are there other questions of our planner? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you both. Yes, Alderman Delishia.
Well, my follow-up question is to Corporation Counsel. Is this transaction been fully, or I should say the conditions or the situation with this particular transaction, and this has been completely disclosed to the buyer, and whether it has or has not, with this new information that we're learning tonight, are we putting the city in a situation where we're facing potential liability because somebody's buying something where not every fact was disclosed to them?
Well, it's their burden to elicit the facts. The city, it's like the zoning that it's in. I doubt we told them specifically that this is in an ABC zone or whatever else. They would do their own. They've purchased other properties in the city of Norwich. You're approving the city manager signing a deed that's satisfactory to him. If they decide they want to back out of the arrangement, they still have time to do that. This is basically a purchase and sales agreement. The time frames that the city planner described are correct in terms of the 60-day hold that we have here if you choose to demolish it. If you choose to restore it, to your own satisfaction, the requirements are more aspirational than binding in the sense of it being in a historic area. The property may have been in good condition when it was listed for the historic register. That, I think, would be an overstatement now in its current condition. So, I mean, I think if you approve it tonight and the individual decides they don't want it, we would let them back out if you want. Or you can amend it to say that they could do that if they choose to. Assuming they still want to buy it, we would sell it to them at the price of $15,000, and we don't know exactly what they plan to do with it at this point.
So in a run-of-the-mill purchase and sale agreement where there's a mortgage involved, the lender would force you to have a title search done.
Well, there's nothing, I mean, the title search would show that the city had taken it for back taxes.
Right.
The title search really would have not too much to do with this unless there was a title defect that made marketable title difficult, in which case they would have the right to back out also. Presumably, they will do a title search. Presumably, if there's any issues there that they are concerned about, they'll raise those issues, and we would proceed appropriately.
Right, and obviously it's our responsibility to act in the best interest of the city, but at the same time, I want to be completely forthright and transparent anytime we deal with anybody on behalf of the city.
Well, we're selling the property as is, where is. They had a right to look at it. They would form their own opinion about the condition of the property. And as I said, I think the description of it as well-maintained may have been true when it got on the historic register, but probably would not be true today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Nash.
I have similar concerns as Alderman DeLucia. What happens if all of a sudden they buy the house, they start moving on it, and then they find out it's on the historical register, they can't knock it down, and then we're putting all these time constraints, 90 days, 80 days, 60 days, whatever. What's that costing the city to do these things to stop them from tearing down a piece of property they purchased?
Well, under the city ordinance, they would need a demolition permit to tear it down. Normally, there's a 30-day waiting period if it were just an ordinary piece of property. If it's on the historic register or a historic property, there is a 60-day period before they can tear it down, before the CO can be issued for them, rather the permit can be issued for them. In addition, as the planner indicated, there is, because of the nature of the property, somewhere in Title 22A, I think, of the general statutes, there's a provision that the state historic office can impose another extended delay on it and attempt to locate someone else to either take over or to buy it from them or to assist them in some way, shape, or form. So yes, there would be a time frame. It would be a determination by the SHPO as to how significant this is in terms of the district and as to whether they would allow it to be taken down or not. That would be so that those are things that could occur if their goal is to take it down. If their goal is to renovate it, then those wouldn't apply.
But what would be the cost if we had to wait? Would it be a cost conferred by the city?
No, the cost would be simply they wouldn't be able to do what they
Okay,
wanted
I
as soon as
just
they
want to make
wanted.
sure it wasn't costing us.
It'd be,
Thank you.
Is there further question? Concern? Yes, Pro Tem Davenport.
Basically, though, as you mentioned, the city manager is basically going to be driving this bus, if I could use that.
I mean, they've
As far as
signed-
on behalf of the city?
Let's put it this way, they've signed an offer to buy it at a particular price. If they decide tomorrow they don't want to buy it, or they don't want to pay that price, they can serve notice that they don't want to go forward with this. We haven't signed the agreement yet, we haven't been authorized to do it. The city manager doesn't have to sign it first thing tonight. We can wait a short time, and then they conclude whether they still want to go forward with the transaction. If that's if the council's more comfortable with that.
Could we just ask the city manager to make sure that the people are aware of the historical situation with the
I mean, the easiest way would be to suggest they talk with the city planner.
Yeah, either that, any of those, that would be fine.
We'll do that.
Thank you. Is there further concern? Seeing none, all those in favor of the resolution amended? It's unanimous.
Number 7, relative to the sale of 58 Division Street.
Thank you. I'd ask for a motion and I would like to offer amending language in that motion to fill in the blanks again. Alderwoman Wilson, second Alderwoman Gould. In paragraph 3, where the price is to be listed, it's $42,900. Again, in paragraph 4, line 4, again, where the price is listed, it's again $42,900 to TMC Key West LLC of North Situate, Rhode Island. And again, further down in the same paragraph, after the words "a deed of conveyance to," it is TMC Key West LLC of North Situate, Rhode Island. The motion was by Alderwoman Miles, second by Alderwoman Gould. Is there discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to amend? A motion, a vote to pass the resolution as amended. Unanimous. Vote is 7-0.
Number 8, relative to the Norwich Events Organization holding the St. Patrick's Day Parade, March 1st, 2020.
Motion, please, bring this forward. Alderwoman Miles, second, please. Alderwoman Gould. Is there discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? It's unanimous. Motion 7-0.
Number 9, relative to authorizing the use of a portion of the parking lot located at 8284 Franklin Street for an outside event March 1st, 2020 for the St. Patrick's Day Parade.
Motion, please, bring this forward. Alderman Nash, second. Alderwoman Miles. Is there discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? It's unanimous. The vote is 7-0.
Number 10, relative to establish a recreation ad hoc committee to resurface the Armstrong tennis courts.
Motion to bring this forward, please. Alderman Wilson, second. Alderman Nash. Is there discussion? Alderman Wilson.
So I will say first, I'm fully in support of this. I think when we talk about opportunities to do things within the city, this is one that a group of individuals that have a passion for tennis are doing. It's a creative way to get out and allow them the opportunity to navigate their own boat as far as what they see fit for the courts, but also doing some due diligence of their own with fundraising and really coming up with the most equitable way to restore the courts. You know, there's a lot of kids that want to play tennis. If you go on a hot spring and summer day over to Stanton, you see many kids out on those courts, both in the basketball and the tennis courts. You know, this is an opportunity for us to expand what we have here in the city, bring a tennis court that was very alive when it was taken care of. And I think the other part to this is the clay courts have become too much for them to maintain with all of the other responsibilities. It's not an easy task to upkeep, and they've done the best that they can. We need to look for a solution that allows the courts to be used year-round if need be, but also a surface that's easier to take care of. So I'm in full support for them doing the work and stepping forward to help the city get something done.
Thank you. Alderman Nash.
I just wanted to, Mr. Bowie made a comment that he hadn't seen anybody, but when my children were littler, like 12, 14, 15 years old, we used to go up to those tennis courts all the time and bat the ball around. I'm probably the absolute worst tennis player that ever existed, but it was fun to watch my kids run around and play. And we had cheap racks from like Walmart and stuff, and it wasn't like, it was an expensive thing. I would say it was almost inexpensive as soccer. You need a ball and a field. Well, in tennis, you need a cheap racket and a couple of balls, and they don't have to be that good. And if you actually go there, you'll see some lying around. So sometimes it's even free balls. So I'd like to see that get restored. There's a lot of materials today other than clay that we can use that will give a very good, effective play time on the court. Again, I'm not a big tennis guy, but I'm hoping it's also a domino effect because they have the Jenkins courts, the Stanton courts, and the Taffield courts. And I believe there used to be courts over at Thamesville, over off of 32. So I hope it's a domino effect that if we get these going, and then the interest gets back generated. And again, with the rec department building on its programs, maybe we can get some tennis, tennis clinics and. Or even just using those playgrounds again and letting kids go out there with a cheap racket and some balls and just smack them around and develop interests. And that's where the great tennis players come from, some 6-year-old running around on a court someplace in the heat just smacking the ball around. So I'll be in favor of this, and I hope the rest of the council will support it. Thank you.
Thank you. President Pro Tem Knapp. Old move. Bettencourt.
This is not really I mean, the concept of having this group involved is a little newer, but certainly this is something, doing something with these courts doing something different with these courts is something we've been talking about one way, shape, or form for as long as I've been involved with city government. So we've never quite managed to get anything off the ground. So I'm glad to see that at least, we're moving forward on something that this group is willing to put in the time and effort and possibly raise some funds. I'll say that I myself have been out there on those courts when they were in better repair. And I will challenge Alderman Nash's, stipulation that he was the worst tennis player. I certainly could challenge him on that effect. But with that said, it's great fun. It's good family fun, and I think is a real possibility there if we do something with that site, and that we can actually start a new tennis renaissance, if you will, in the city. And I'd be certainly welcome. It would be welcome to see.
Thank you. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? It's unanimous. Motion 7-0.
I hereby move pursuant to Connecticut General Statute, Section 1-200, subsection 6, that the members of the Norwich City Council go into an executive session for the purpose of discussing strategies and negotiations with respect to collective bargaining. The following individuals shall be asked to participate during all or portions of this executive session at the request of the City Council. City Manager John Salamone, Director of Human Resources Bridget Marks, Assistant Finance Director Tony Madeira, and Corporation Counsel Michael Driscoll.
Second, Pro Tem Bettencourt. All those in favor?
Sorry.
Alderwoman Miles.
Okay, Miles, sorry. I didn't have it on my phone. Go ahead.
I apologize. Again, Alderwoman Miles, second by Alderwoman Wilson, to return. All those in favor? It's unanimous. The record show no votes were taken.
Number 11, relative to the approval of the Municipal Employees Union Independent City Hall Supervisor Collective Bargaining Unit Agreement and related budget changes to the fiscal year 2019-2020.
Motion, please bring this forward. Alderman Nash, second by Alderwoman Wilson. Miles, excuse me. Is there discussion? All those in favor? It's unanimous.
Number 12.
7-0.
Sorry. Number 12, relative to the approval of the Local 892 International Association of Firefighters Collective Bargaining Unit Agreement and the related budget changes for fiscal year 2019-2020.
Motion, please bring it forward. Alderman Nash, second by Alderwoman Miles. Is there discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? It's unanimous. The vote is 7-0.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor? It's unanimous. We are adjourned.